Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I am Bill Oram, joined this week by a man who can now say he has finally seen it all. Nick Daschel, the Oregon State beat writer for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Nick, we got to talk about the fake field goal at the end of the first half by the Beavers against Arizona. I mean, to quote Phil Dunphy, America's dad on Modern Family, WTF, why the face?
Yeah, it was a head scratcher for sure. I mean, social media just completely lit up the second that backfired, and I can't disagree with them. I'm actually a big advocate of those sort of plays, but not in that situation. That might have been the only situation where you don't run that play, because I mean, it gets a first down on virtually any other situation, but in that one, he had to get all the way to the end zone and didn't get there. Yeah, I mean, Jonathan knew it was a bad call as soon as Atticus, grabbed the pitch from the holder. I mean, he knew it was a bad call. Although Arizona even admitted yesterday that had Oregon State not tipped them off on the field goal, the first field goal, they would have scored on it because they knew what was coming. And they had a couple of guys back in protection. Had Oregon State not kind of tipped their hand a little bit, he might have scored on that. But regardless, it was a dumb play in that situation.
So the Beavers go on to lose 27-24 to Arizona. They are now 6-2. Nick, I follow you on Twitter. I've seen you trying to fight the fight that that Jonathan Smith does not need to be fired, and that Corvallis is not in shambles. But it seems like the reaction has been, and I think a lot of it does tie back to that fake field goal. But how has the fan base sort of taken the loss to Arizona? And please put in context losing to Arizona this year, because this is not the Arizona of the last few years that the rest of the Pac-12 was so used to beating.
No, and you got to be careful about gauging what's on social media and whatnot as to what is the true reaction from the fan base, because I mean, Twitter's can be, or X or whatever you want to call it. It can be a real dumpster fire, especially with people that don't identify themselves. They just throw stuff out there, and I think the fan base is upset about the call. They didn't like losing the game, but they're fully behind Jonathan. I mean, anyone that thinks that Jonathan Smith needs to be fired or even looked at over that is insane. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. The guy has taken a program from, I mean, you could argue that it was the worst FBS program in the country when he took it over, to a top 20 program. And I think he can, at this stage, you could say he could, now because of conference realignment, things may change, but had they not changed, I mean, he might have a top 20 program pretty much for as long as he's here, the way he's running things. So, it's ridiculous to even think that Jonathan is the wrong guy for this job. But you asked about Arizona. I was penciling out something here today. I think Arizona could finish 7-2 in the conference. They could potentially. I don't think it's going to happen, because I think Oregon and Washington are going to find a way to both finish 8-1 and get to the conference championship game. But I mean, Arizona's got, I want to say, UCLA, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona State left. I mean, they're all games they could win.
And I think UCLA and Utah are both at home.
Right. Those, and their two toughest games are at home, and the Arizona State and Colorado games are on the road. I mean, those are games they could win all those. I don't know if they're ready to win all four of them, but they could, and they could finish 7-2 and put themselves in a nice position in the season. So that's a good football team that Oregon State lost to, and Arizona did not win the game on that fake field goal. They won it in the fourth quarter. They bullied Oregon State with a running game, and Oregon State couldn't handle it. That's where it came down to. Oregon State had a chance to put that game away. It was 17-13. Oregon State had the ball with, 11 minutes, about 11 minutes left. They put together a nice long drive. They might have put that game away. Instead, they got 3 and out, punted, and Arizona just took over.
Yeah. Okay, so 6-2. Beavers are already bowl eligible. 4 games left, starting this weekend in Boulder against Colorado. I think early in the year we looked at this as a big moment because of the Coach Prime effect, because of Deion Sanders. I mean, maybe I'm alone here. I mean, Deion is still a big story, but Colorado's struggles in the last month have sort of knocked that down a peg in terms of the buzz factor around college football. How are you looking at this game, Nick, and what has you excited about Saturday? You and I are both going to be in Boulder for this one, for another night game for the Beavers. What's got your attention, and how much of it has to do with Coach Prime?
Well, I mean, regardless of whether it's Dion or Prime or whatever you want to call whoever you want to call him. I mean, Colorado, Oregon State, the last 2 trips back there under Smith have been must-see TV. I mean, they both games have gone to overtime. The one in 2018, Oregon State won 41-34 in overtime after trailing 31-3 in the third quarter. I mean, that was the signature win of the Smith rookie season. And then 2 years ago, Oregon State lost in overtime, and they forced overtime by when Everett Hayes kicked a 60-yard field goal to tie it up. I mean, the last 2 have just been great games. Now, this is going to be a totally different. The storyline with this is obviously, playing against Dion and a sold-out crowd, and I don't know what. Yeah, I don't really know what a night game in Boulder is like. I tried to find a little bit, and the weather's supposed to be pretty good. So, I mean, Colorado's kind of struggling, but you can't dismiss them. And the way they move the ball, that's not a team that you can just chalk up as a free square and say we're moving on to Stanford. Oregon State's got to play pretty well to win back there, even though they are a 2-touchdown favorite.
Yeah, as good as the Beavers have been, right? And we look at them as one of the top teams in the Pac-12. They've been vulnerable this year, right? Like, I think the Cal game was a bit of a scare, and when you look at what Washington State, for example, was able to do against the Beavers secondary. Now, granted, Washington State was playing out of their minds and made some incredible catches down the field, but that is the MO at Colorado as well. And so, is Colorado going to have success in isolating their receivers against Oregon State's DBs? That does feel like a bit of trouble for Oregon State.
Yeah, somebody made the comment earlier this week or something. I can't remember who mentioned it, but if only Arizona and Washington State had been flipped on the schedule, Oregon State might be atop the Pac-12 right now, because they catch Arizona in the opener of the Pac-12. I mean, that's probably a game Oregon State wins. They catch Washington State right now. That's a game Oregon State, I'm sure they win. I think they're. I still believe they're better than Washington State, but Washington State was playing out of their minds right then, and they're not now.
Isn't it interesting? I was just gonna say, isn't it interesting that Oregon State's 2 losses this year have come down to onside kicks that, by the way, both of them looked like Oregon State either was going to get or had a great shot at getting. I mean, it just speaks to how thin the margins have been. Now, granted, getting down to the end and needing an onside kick to recover an onside kick to win a game is, the odds are not in your favor. But I mean, they've lost 2 games by a total of 6 points, and have been right there. And really has come down to execution on one more drive in each of those games.
Yeah, last year, they won a couple of those games that they shouldn't have won, and they haven't had one of those yet this year. So maybe you're thinking in November, maybe there's a game out there that they win that maybe they shouldn't win. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of wishful thinking. But I was looking at this November schedule. I mean, at this point, this Colorado game's pretty important, because if they win that, then I think they go at least 3-1 in November. I don't think they could beat Oregon and Eugene, but I suppose if you win Colorado, you beat Colorado, beat Stanford, beat Washington, maybe you got enough feel good to go into Eugene and do something. I don't know, but if they don't beat Colorado, I mean, they're going to beat Stanford at home because they're pretty good at home. But I mean,
right,
you don't beat Colorado 1-3 in November, and a 7-5 record starts to come into play pretty prominently.
I agree with you, and I but I do also. I mean, you got my attention there by saying that that if you beat Colorado, you're looking at least 3-1 because that means beating Stanford, which I think we would pencil as a win at this point, just because Stanford is still trying to find themselves, despite a couple of strong performances in the last couple of weeks under Troy Taylor, but don't expect them to come in and win at Reser. But Washington, the next weekend on November 18th, that is a game that I think that people around the Pac-12 should be paying close attention to. If Oregon State is, or excuse me, if Washington is still undefeated going into that game, um, that does feel like a massive. It's obviously a massive opportunity for Oregon State and a massive test for Washington, but that could be a game that ends up changing the axis of the postseason in college football. Now, I don't know if Washington loses to Oregon State and then were to get to the Pac-12 championship game and beat Oregon, do they still get to the playoff? I think so, as a one-loss team. But Oregon State, Washington on November 18th is starting to feel like a game that kind of almost no matter what happens with Oregon State over the next couple of weeks is going to have massive implications, because I don't think even if the Beavers do lose to Colorado and beat Stanford, I don't think you can look at them as an easy out at home against Washington. Now, maybe some of that gets a little overinflated. Obviously, Utah had 129 of 30 at home before Oregon came in and absolutely smoked them. And if you watched the video that Oregon put out, kind of the feature film that they've been doing off of each game, Dan Lanning told his team before the game in Salt Lake, what do those 30 games have to do with our game today? Answer's absolutely nothing, and that's true. But there is something to Oregon State's success at home, and they are a different team at home. They play better at Reser, and so Washington, Oregon State, November 18th. That might end up being the game of the year for Oregon State. Now, obviously, the Oregon game at the end is going to have a whole lot of meaning and a lot of real emotion for a whole lot of people. But on the road in Eugene against this Oregon team feels like a real test for Oregon State that, can't rule them out, can't rule anything out in that rivalry. But, Washington on November 18th is the one I'm excited for.
Yeah, I mean, Washington right now is not, it doesn't appear to be the same team they were when they played Oregon. Penix has been either sick or a little bit banged up. Their receivers are banged up. Their defense isn't playing as well as it was. I don't know if it's just a blip in the schedule, or a little bit of a hangover from Oregon, or maybe they get well in a few weeks. But this doesn't feel like a good spot for Washington when they play Oregon State, because they'll have had to play USC this week and then Utah next and the following week before they play Oregon State. So Washington's got a chance to be. I mean, they're going to be. This is a 3-game stretch where Washington could completely fall apart or really make their case for a top 4 playoff berth. I don't know which way it's going to go for Washington, but I definitely think it's a game Oregon State can win, because they just play better at home. They just do.
Well, if you've watched any of Washington in the last couple of weeks, I mean, I listened to the Arizona State game on my way back from Eugene, and that was shocking. And then watching them against Stanford last weekend, it just it just isn't a team that and granted, I will say that it felt like they were going to take over at the end, and things were kind of going to bounce their way. But I mean, Washington got away with an insane pass interference call against Arizona State, and Stanford had a 4th down play that probably leads to a score, and to take a late lead that if the ball doesn't just get dropped. I mean, a catch that Nick Daschel could have even made. Well, I don't know about that, but I could have made that very well could have sent Washington to its first loss of the year, and not a good loss like Oregon has. So the Huskies do feel vulnerable right now, for sure.
By the way, I'm pretty sure I was a better flag football player at college than you were at Montana, but anyway. One thing we're not talking about, and this doesn't really have anything to do with Oregon State, but it does have to do with Washington. This weekend could be fairly pivotal. I mean, everybody's pretty much discounting USC now. Well, what if they go and beat Washington next week or this week? And then, who's to say they can't beat UCLA? I mean, that's they only have 3 more conference games left. They could finish. They could easily finish with 1 loss, and they have Oregon. Okay, so USC is still in a position if they win this week to finish 7-2. Washington loses to USC. Washington loses to Oregon State. All of a sudden, we got chaos at the top, and so this weekend's pretty important for Oregon State outside of Boulder, just to see what happens, in places like Arizona with UCLA and USC with Washington. Those 2 games could be important for Oregon State.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't know. I mean, the Pac-12 has had a pretty clear pecking order all season, but November scheduling is no joke. And, even some of these things that you look at, I think we kind of all give Oregon, assume Oregon has kind of a cakewalk into the end of the year. Well, I mean, Oregon has Cal at home. I don't expect them to be tested by Cal, but Justin Wilcox has won games at Autzen before. Cal has been a tough out this year. They haven't won a lot of games, but they've put up a lot of points, which is not their typical MO. And that game against Arizona State at Arizona State on November 18th, same day Washington's in Corvallis, that feels a little scary to me if I'm Oregon. They haven't really had any of their, they've had low mistake games. They've been pretty untested, with the exception of the Washington game. Does something like an Arizona State, maybe it's a night game, does that end up testing? Does some of that catch up with Oregon? I don't know. Kenny Dillingham playing his former team, coaching against Bo Nix. That's one that I think a lot of people will be watching as a potential upset. So the Pac-12 could look very different at the end of November than it does.
Well, and the other thing is, when we get to the end of the season with Oregon State, I mean, at this point, I don't think a lot of people see Oregon State beating Oregon. But when they get in those situations where there's a lot on the line and Oregon State's playing Oregon, those games have traditionally been difficult to win for the team that needs to win. You look at the '94 game where Oregon State needed to win to get to the Rose Bowl. They didn't exactly run Oregon State off the field. It was a 4-point game.
Yeah,
the 2000 game, that was the Joey 5-pick game, and that was one where either team wins. They got big stakes. I think it was 2007 or 8. The one that was a 37-33 game. I mean, traditionally, this has been a difficult game for Oregon or Oregon State to win when they had to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Because 2008, Oregon State gets to the Rose Bowl with a win. They lose. 2009, the winner goes to the Rose Bowl, and Oregon did win it at home, but only by a hair. And that was the Masoli 4th and 3 from midfield play call that tilted the scales toward everyone going for it on 4th down now. So you're right. I mean, that game is not going to be. I don't think we're going to be driving down to Corvallis the morning after Eugene. By the way, Nick, I assume we're carpooling to Eugene. Do you mind if we give my dad a ride to Salem? I'm just trying to plan some holiday logistics.
Sure.
Okay, Dad, if you're listening, we got it sorted out. So, I mean, that game is going to, have massive implications as well. I mean, I think Oregon is almost. I at this point, I feel very confident saying Oregon's going to be playing for a place in the Pac-12 championship game, kind of one way or another. And the Beavers, maybe, depending on how November goes, they could be trying to sneak in too.
Yeah, I mean, at losing Arizona took the odds from maybe 50% down to about 10 or 5, but still, I mean, there's still some stakes for Oregon State they're on the line these next 4 weeks for Oregon State, so it's not completely over yet. It's just the Arizona thing just totally took the air out of the balloon, because I mean, let's just say Oregon State had beaten Arizona. That's a team that people would have been talking about Tuesday at the CFP rankings. I'm not so sure Oregon State wouldn't have been ahead of Oregon in the rankings had they won, because they have more quality wins than Oregon. That alone, and same record and more quality wins. They got the 2 top 25 wins that Oregon doesn't have, and so there's a possibility they might have been ahead of Oregon in the CFP had they beaten Arizona.
You were surprised that Oregon was ranked as high as it was in the CFP, though. The Ducks were 6th in the CFP, and to your point, doesn't have the top 25 wins. Some of it's what we would have considered its better wins. Texas A&M has not been very good this year. Washington State, which was a God, I keep doing that. I've done that several times. I did that on the radio the other day too. Texas Tech, I was there, has not been very good, and has kind of not been much of a quality win, despite feeling very much like a quality win when we were there. Washington State, despite spending much of the year in the top 25, not really a quality win by the time the Ducks got around to them. Whereas you look at Alabama wins against Tennessee and Ole Miss, with its only loss coming to Texas, behind the Ducks. Texas, with a win against Alabama and its only loss being to OU, in the Red River rivalry game. So I think you actually can build a case that Oregon was a little overranked in the CFP. Not that the CFP rankings at this point mean anything, because the only thing that really matters about the CFP is who's in the top 4 at the end. And if Oregon wins out, Oregon's going to be in the top 4, because they're going to have wins now against USC, Oregon State, and whoever's in the Pac-12 championship game against them, probably Washington. You win all those, you're in the playoff, no questions asked. And so it's interesting to me that Oregon was ranked where they were, but not all that.
No, I think Oregon is a little overranked in the CFP at this point, but like you said, it doesn't really matter, because it matters what happens on, the last poll the CFP puts out. I think Oregon is more number 6 because of the quote unquote eyeball test, as opposed to statistically what they've done. I mean, they look like one of the best teams in the country right now, but statistically they haven't really proven that that's that. But they will, if they run through this schedule and win all these games, they'll have plenty of evidence to prove they're one of the top 4 in the country. But it's just,
I also think that Oregon is getting like a credit, like a rebate for the Washington game, because everybody blames Dan Lanning's decision making and not the team. So it's almost like Oregon is getting credit for beating Washington, because everybody knows that they could have, if not should have, beaten Washington. So it's almost like they're getting credit for winning that game, even though they didn't.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, and perhaps, I don't know. I just, like I said, but I go back to Oregon State. I just wonder. I mean, I was thinking about this this morning. That might have been the biggest. You could make an argument that's one of the biggest losses of the Smith era, if not maybe the biggest loss, because just look at the opportunity that the chance for exposure and whatnot, the stakes these next couple weeks. I mean, who's to say Oregon State wouldn't have been 8 or 7 in that first rankings? They beat Colorado, beat Stanford. Now all of a sudden they're close to the top 4 with a game against Washington. I mean, what an opportunity that was just booted away by losing the game at Arizona. Not that Arizona's not a good team, but that's a game they could have won, and boy, would it have been a big one.
Oregon State is currently ranked 3rd among the 2-loss teams in the CFP, behind Notre Dame, which is 12th, and LSU, which is 13th. Right. So if Oregon State had been 7-1, you can certainly move them ahead of at least those two. So they are at worst, the 12 spot, kind of in the range of, Ole Miss, OU, Penn State, Alabama, and Texas. So yeah, I mean, you're right in terms of the opportunity lost and where they could have been, and considering, I mean, that they did go into that game as a slight favorite, right? They were slightly favored against Arizona. Everybody knew that was going to be trouble. I picked them to lose by a field goal. I think you picked them to win narrowly, but everyone knew that was going to be a close game and a hard out, which leads me back, by the way, to, in a game that only had 20 points at the time. And yes, I understand Jonathan has owned it, but I feel very strongly that is a situation where, there aren't going to be a lot of points scored in this game. Field goals help. But I think we've settled that at this point.
Yeah, I think, but Jonathan's also convinced you got to score in this league to win, and so
Yeah.
I mean, you go back to the Cal game where 4th and 3, down 17-14. I realize it's the second quarter, but I mean, that's a situation where the numbers say kick the field goal and tie the game up. No, he went for it on 4th and goal from the 3, and they scored on it. But I mean, what if they don't score there? I mean, those are the things I just feel like he owned the mistake, but he's going to keep doing this stuff because he just believes that's what you got to do, even though the numbers really suggest that a lot of these coaches are doing the wrong thing in a lot of these 4th down situations. I've seen enough evidence out there that shows that, you know, these guys are going for it way too often in these situations. And like I said, I've been an advocate of it, but I'm not so sure that I'm even right on that.
Nick, I do want to, before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you about Aiden Childs because I thought his drive against Arizona was one of the real bright spots for the Beavers down in the desert. And he's been doing that, one drive in the first half, going back to the Utah game, I believe was the first time that Jonathan kind of deployed that. And if I'm not mistaken, I thought this was the best it had looked. What did you think?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, take out the one throw, and you can't take it away, obviously. But take that one throw away. Was it really that great of a drive? I mean, it was 3rd and 18. He throws a 52-yard pass, and then they don't really do anything with it once they get in close to the red zone. And so, I mean, it was. I mean, what we did see is the guy's got a huge arm. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I mean, that was 52 yards, and it was all in the air, not any yards after the catch. And so we did see that. I mean, he did. They've scored touchdowns on 2 of his. Well, this is what is this the 4th? This is the 4th time he's played in one of these situations, and I think he scored touchdown. But this is the one situation where he's actually had, the length of the field to go. A lot of the other ones were from midfield or inside, inside the opponent's side of the field. So, but it's just more. I guess what it did show is the guy can make plays. I mean, he can make plays. He proved it with that throw. He bought himself some time back there and got Gould down the field. So there's that. But I don't know that it was his best drive, but I do think that, we did see he's what he's capable of.
Yeah, he got him down to the 12, and then Automaticus came in from 35 yards. But I guess the question would be, given, I say this delicately, but that was not, by contrast, that was not DJ's best game. And now he had a nice drive at the very end, give the Beavers a chance, but he struggled, particularly in the second half. Do you think there are opportunities, or there will be opportunities, or Jonathan will look for opportunities as we get into the stretch run of the season to give Childs, and maybe now so even more that this is a 2-loss Beaver team, will he be looking for opportunities to give Childs additional series, additional reps, or do you think he's going to stick with this 1 series per game sort of approach?
Hard to say. He doesn't really tip his hand on that stuff. I mean, I think you definitely can see him continue to play this 3rd series, but and I think you got to stick with DJ. I don't know that he played terribly at Arizona. I think they were covering the first couple options on. People said, "Oh, DJ looked like he was indecisive." I think he was just they gave him time, and he couldn't. His first 2 options weren't open, and he had enough time to wait for his 3rd and 4th option to open up. And that's, I think the one thing I thought he could have done Saturday, and this isn't really something that I didn't even ask Brian Linger this, but there were opportunities to run there. They were running guys down the field, and I think Jim Wilson pointed this out on the broadcast. And he's right. They DJ could have taken off on some of those and got some runs, because when he gets some momentum going, he's 8 yards for you can bring him down because he's just such a load. And I thought that was the one thing he probably could have done Saturday they didn't do was take off on occasion on some of those. But yeah, I don't really see Aiden getting more than 1 series for now, but I guess anything's possible.
All right, Nick, we're going to get out of here. But before we do, I would like to get your revised bowl projection for the Beavers now that they are a 2-loss team with Washington and Oregon left on the schedule. I think we'd both been feeling pretty good about the Beavs maybe in the Holiday Bowl. There's been some talk about possibly an Oregon State Clemson Holiday Bowl. Then again, I don't know if Clemson is doing enough on its end for the DJ reunion. But where do you see the Beavers playing in December at this point? I assume it's December.
So I kind of went through the rest of the schedule with everybody just to see where I felt like the records would. And at this point, I got Oregon and Washington 8-1, and they're gonna take a CFP and an NY6 bowl. So the next bowl after that's the Alamo Bowl. I got Arizona finishing 7-2, and I think they're going to the Alamo Bowl. Then I got Oregon State and UCLA at 6-3. That means Holiday and Sun. I got to believe Oregon State is the Holiday Bowl selection, even though UCLA's got more TVs for a couple of reasons. Oregon State beat UCLA, and the Holiday Bowl still has not got over the UCLA snubbing them a couple years ago during the COVID thing. So I got Oregon State going to the Holiday Bowl and UCLA going to the Sun. Now, you can't ever discount these bowls can take any team that's within one loss of a team. Oregon State 6-3. They could take any 5-4 team if they want. The Holiday and the Alamo Bowl. So you never can discount what they're going to do with USC because of the giant TV market. So if that's not a factor to the bowl, then I think Oregon State's going to the Holiday Bowl. But that means they got to finish they got to win 3 of their last 4 games. If they don't do that, then we're looking at Sun or lower.
So my dream of taking you to Carnitas Lonja in San Antonio is dying.
Well, I mean, I'm probably a little too optimistic on Arizona, but I just think the way the schedule sets up and whatnot that they're gonna win out from here. But I mean, I suppose that's a team that could stub its toe a couple of times just because they got a freshman at quarterback, and who knows if they can handle handle being a team that people think are pretty good. That part I don't know, but either way, it's looking like I'm not going to be home at Christmas if it's the Alamo or Holiday, because both those games are right after Christmas.
And then what about drinking buckets of Lone Stars at the Legion Hall at the end of the Riverwalk? Sorry, I really love San Antonio.
I do.
Most.
No,
so
this
is disheartening for me.
I do too. Except the last time I was there, it rained 9 inches in 3 days, so that wasn't a great experience. But that was in June, so it wasn't it wasn't the winter the winter of San Antonio. But yes, I'd be happy if we were. I'd be happy if we both were there. For although that I think that game's on the 28th, so. And the Holiday's on the 27th. We also may be in El Paso.
I've driven through El Paso. Isn't there a steakhouse? I remember back in the day when I think Oregon State had a Sun Bowl. Maybe it was the Missouri Sun Bowl. But I remember reading Paul Bucher filing dispatches from some steakhouse in the middle of the desert.
I think there's a steak. So, I've covered 3 Sun Bowls, and I think it's a steakhouse that might be in Las Cruces. Or is it Las? I think that's where. I think that might be where, because it borders. It's on the border of New Mexico, but if you've never been there,
I'll be in Juarez if you need me.
No, you will not. I've done that. Don't want to do it again. One of the bowls I went to, they took the team to a bullfight over in Juarez, so that was kind of fun. But that was many years ago.
I'm in for that completely. But I guess we will. I mean, Nick, could we possibly record an episode of the Oregonian Sports podcast from a bullfight?
I'm not going to Juarez, so if you want to do that, you're on your own. I value. I want to come back to the Northwest.
So we'll keep this conversation going then. I didn't hear a no, so we'll just keep going. All right, and with that, I would like to thank everyone for listening to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I'm not going to give Nick another opportunity to speak here. I'm Bill Oram. He's Nick Daschel. Catching up on all things Beavers, a little bit of Pac-12. Sure appreciate you listening. By the way, I do want to say that you can continue to read all of our stories at Oregon Live. We're doing a lot of cool new stuff with video and with different ways of reaching our readers, and including a campaign of a texting campaign where if you are interested in getting updates from us delivered directly to your cell phone that only come via text, you won't find these on Oregon Live, you won't find these on Twitter or X or Threads or Blue Sky, anywhere else. Shoot us a text. Text 503-386-0095. You do that, you'll get a text back. You can sign up 2 free weeks of texts from me, Aaron Fentress on the Blazers, Nick Daschel on the Beavers, James Crepia on the Ducks, Ryan Clark on the Timbers and Thorns. A lot of fun stuff. We've been having a good time with it. So again, that number is 503-386-0095. Shoot us a text and see what you think. It goes to $3.99 after those first 2 weeks. You can cancel it anytime. But I think after 2 weeks, you're not going to want to cancel. I think you're going to want to keep hearing from us, especially with Nick Daschel's acerbic sense of humor and his great insights into the Beavers like the ones you just heard here today. So again, thank you for listening to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I'm Bill Oram. We'll see you at the ballgame.